Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Milwaukie Poetry Series reading tonight here at the Letting Library on June 14th. Absolutely delighted to see you all here. We were talking earlier, and the sun came out for us, so it's right here, and that is great. And we know that there are other things that you could be doing. I say this regularly, but it's really true. So thank you for being here and coming out and sharing poetry. I want to welcome all of those who are on the live stream and say the same thing to you. Thank you very much for taking your time and logging on. So we are going to have a great reading tonight. I've been looking forward to our poet. Let me say a few things about upcoming events and some thanks before I do that. Thanks to the City of Milwaukie. They have been supportive from the beginning. Thanks to the Letting Library. So we are here in the new Letting Library. It's several years old already, but still seems new. And something that is new, those of you that have not been here perhaps for a while, is we now have art. We now have rotating art shows that are up here in the community room. So it's really great to see that. Take a look at the art. We have a broadside of one of Rick's poems, and I think most people have them. So I see that. Thanks to Kristen for doing that. Thanks to the Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee. So we have a Milwaukie Poetry Series Committee, and people work on it. And Kristen, back here. Kristen is standing, and a couple more members, my lovely wife Jane, David Fider. So let's give the committee a hand, can we? So thank you very much. As you know, you need to have people working on something. So very grateful about that. Thanks finally to Willamette Falls Media and Corey. Corey is our tech person back here, and he is the one that is making everything happen and putting it on live stream and recording. So we are recording. This is going to be up about a week after the event, maybe a little longer. But they will be up for viewing on the Letting Library YouTube channel. Let me say some things about some events that are coming up. We, the Milwaukie Poetry Series, are co-sponsoring our First Fridays. And we have a special reading in June, on June 6th at St. John the Evangelist. We have co-sponsored a writing contest in Clackamas County, and the featured readers are going to be the winners. Are going to be the first place winner and the two honorable mentions. So they will be there, and it's a chance to come out and hear the winners of that contest. And it's going to be hosted by Paul Ann Peterson. So we're very excited about that. Connie Soper is our poet in June, and so she's going to be here on the 11th. And then on the 15th, we are going to co-sponsor with the library a reading by Judith Barrington from her memoir. So that's going to be at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I believe. But there's going to be information out about all of those events. And I think Ariella has got an announcement that she'd like to make. Sure.
Hi, folks. Ariella Sophie from the Clackamas Arts Alliance. Tom is one of our very lovely Literary Arts Committee members, which is why he's helped with the poetry contest. Just wanted to let you all know, if any of you are based here in Milwaukie or nearby, we offer a series of gatherings, which are just informal get-togethers for creative people of any description. You could be a soap maker, you could be a guitar player, you could be a poet, you could be a painter, you could do all sorts of things. We have one coming up in June. I've got flyers over to the side, but June 5th, here in Milwaukie at the Chapel Theater, which if you live here like I do, you might love it as much as I do. That is 6 to 7:30 p.m. And feel free to ask me more information. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that. There are some refreshments over here, so please help yourself. There are some of Rick's books, so they are going to be available after the reading. And so you'll be able to take a look at those. I've been looking forward to Rick's reading, so delighted to have him here. He was raised in California and Montana, taught in Minnesota for many years, and recently moved back to Oregon. He studied poetry writing with Richard Hugo and Madeline DeFries at the University of Montana, where he earned his MFA. Lynx House Press recently published his 7th book of poems, The Oratory of All Souls. The Oratory of All Souls in February 2023. He has a website, so you can Google him and you can find out more information about Rick. So would you join me in welcoming our poet tonight, Rick Robbins. Thank you. Yes? I was just about to say that. And hold this up. She anticipated me. So yes, please be sure your phones are off. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming. And thanks Tom and the board for inviting me. And thanks for everybody who kind of on the day of event makes the details work out as well as they do. Tonight I'll read from 2 books. This one came out, this first one, it was a new and selected poems, and it came out in 2017. So it really is kind of like the greatest hits from 5 previous collections. And then this is the one that Tom was talking about that came out last year, and it's the single collection that came after that. And then I'll read some new ones too that I've never read in public. And I have both of those books for sale, and if you buy one, you qualify for a free What Would Walt Whitman Do bumper sticker. So there's your teaser or your incentive. So the first poems, as I say, and these glasses aren't going to work. The first couple of poems are from Body Turned to Rain, and I'll just launch into them and say things as necessary. Kitchen. How is it? Cutting pink grapefruit, the bloody halves rock a moment on the board, shining up all the way to the table, all the little rooms scooped out, moving your direction on the spoon, and you hardly notice what's going inside. Those hundreds of tears, hundreds of dams near breaking, newspaper glaring back in its dumb way, your mouth open, the city moving the dead river west. I like to read this one because it is kind of the way a lot of my poems work, where they just start with an observation and then something strange happens. I grew up in one of the houses that I grew up in had a formal dining room that wasn't used much except on Easter and Christmas and Thanksgiving, but it was the warehouse for all the fine linens and the china and the silver. And it had the walls had some of the ancestors on them. Old country portraits. My lost sister used to try the trick with the tablecloth, waiting until the wine had been poured, the gravy boat filled, before snapping the linen her way, smug as a matador, staring down silver and crystal that would dare move, paying no mind to the ancestor gloom, gliding across the wallpaper like clouds of a disapproving front, no hutch or bureau spared, no lost sister sure the trick would work this time. All those she loved in another room, nibbling saltines, or in the kitchen plating the last of the roast beef. How amazed they would be to be called to the mahogany room for supper, to find something missing, something beautiful finally, they could never explain. The wine twittering in its half globes, candles aflutter, each thing in its place, or so it seemed then, even though their lives had changed for good. So, kitchen, dining room, day trip to Glacier Park, going to the Sun Road. We used to stay up on Flathead Lake in the summer, and we would never go to Glacier Park because we'd been there a million times before. But then when we had visitors, then we'd all go. And we'd do the big circle trip that was about 250 miles. But we always took our little favorite mug so we could put it under a glacier and drink from it. We didn't worry about giardia or anything back then. You know, it was the 60s, so who cared? Going to the Sun Road. Without fear, we parked the car in the thin bulge beside the cliff and crossed to where the glacier filled our Mickey Mouse or elbow taproom pints, whatever we had brought to taste what came out of the sky 10, 100 years before. If it was Sunday, we'd gone to Mass in Kalispell, then brunched at the Jordan Cafe, where a waiter, regardless of group or size, memorized the order. We'd driven north through narrowing gorges to the park, then up the U-shaped valley on going to the sun, the long, slow string peppered with rockfall, slicked with melt toward Logan Pass. 50 years now, and the family can't remember grizzly prints or eagles plucking char from Lake McDonald, only the forgiven carload, dozy from the road, renewed by the body and blood of Christ, restored by breakfast, slaking its thirst in a field of scree, the water cold as we'd ever known, a taste simple as granite, the sun beating on us at 6,000 feet, and a waterfall being born under our shoes, crossing its first of 4 borders before it died 1,000 miles from there in the sea. So those are from the new and selected poems. The next poems are from my most recent book. I'll read a few more of those. As I discussed with Tom in an interview last week, if there's at least one strong current in that book, it's that I'm, and you don't think about this when you're writing the poems one at a time, but you do when you're collecting them. It seemed like there were a lot of poems that dealt with like individual or community suffering of some sort or another, sometimes as individual as, you know, the suffering of my mother, sometimes as communal, as the suffering of children separated from their parents at the border. You know, so it kind of flexes along that kind of spectrum. I also have some poems in there that respond to artists, work of other artists who share some concern, share some of those same concerns. This is the first poem in the book. It's kind of a big, roily, chaotic poem, but it demanded that it be first, to the extent poems can talk. Wave. Every day and always, the stray pebble finds him, an eye looking up from the path to another's execution, the camouflaged jury of peers beneath which the earth goes on with its thinking. How will he ever know the way around it? Eye looking out from a 900-year-old plant painting on granite, eye of salmon up from the depths of a glacial lake, eye of octopus and rat, eye of daisy, eye at the end of a sentence. On long drives across the desert, the earth has its way with him, wind and grit in his face, his neck turned to leather. The sun screams quietly, the large birds circle. Over the mountains he smells the ocean salt again, the smell of a son's head moments after birth. The basin spreads out 80 miles toward the sea, basin of 1 million homes, 100,000 crimes of love or theft, acts of mercy, one at a time, under a fog that will leave God blind for hours. Cars explode across the arteries, expanding in every direction. The salt settles on everything, living or dead. Every day and always the wave that spins above him, a bright wash of turbulence, a prayer for the new life. He lets tide pull him from the sandy shore. He walks avenues of the great western city, nodding to strangers, casual with air, even as the undertow nags at his feet, even as persons on the beach will blur into the white of their own care. How will he ever know the daily way back to solid ground, to loved ones with their own rituals of renewal? How will he know the eye falls beyond him? Even the machinery of the world will find its way back from loss, even as it carries the grief of billions, even as the blood on its surface, blood of birth or blood of revolution, raises the flag of its shame and its reward. So in this poem, in this book, there are some poems that sort of follow a similar little tack. And so here's two that follow one of those tacks. And the way I summarized these poems are, they're basically about men doing ordinary things and not being jerks, or dysfunctional in some way or another. So, looking for the man in a field. Would the man stand at the end of a knife, the turned-up head of cauliflower? Would the man wipe sweat from his face, fold a red handkerchief for his pocket? Would he sit in the dust and shade beside his truck and laugh between bites of a sandwich? Would he whistle as long as the tractor starts? Would the man say a rosary for each row of grapes or lettuce? Would the man curse or befriend the sun? Would he become the movement of an arm, a leg? Would he think himself some other place, on a front walk where Marisol, Peter, where even Hector the good dog would greet him after the light had failed? Would the man burn to nothing like morning fog in the rose? Would the man leave his shadow there? Would he walk back out of darkness like a ghost or like dawn? Would any word he is saying come from the dark, the light, or the vine? Did it find the man in the field? Did he and the field move inside each other until the word found his tongue? And then similar title, Looking for the Man on the Sidewalk. The man under a garbage bag, singing Leadbelly to his own breath. The man in a gray checked suit. The man like my grandfather, Los Angeles, 1958, walking on thin leather with the pickets. The man whose child grows from one hand, whose woman's arm loops through his. The man stepping out of a cab across rainwater to the democracy of stone. The man who sings too loud or goes crazy too wide, building side to curb. The man looking up like a hick from wheat country. The man looking up, wondering at the strength of glass. The man weeping into his collar. The man who sings Enrico Caruso singing opera. The man stopping to tear at a scab on his wrist. The man who tells time with each step, telling a story each time, looking at his watch, tearing at a scab. The man fearing his own strength, the animal body, walking out of a bar into light. The man afraid of his father's name. The man who remembers the last day in the army, folding and stowing. The man thinking about his grandmother under a hot helmet in the beauty salon. The man whose ears ring like tin. The man who stares straight through everyone else's body, like standing up in a small boat halfway across the ocean, like standing up knowing there's something over that far curve. So, I have a poem about my mother here and a poem about my father. I have another one later about my father. My mother left my father a month before I was born, so she and my sisters and I in utero moved in with my grandparents, and that was the best thing that could have ever happened. So, but still, my mother was quite lonely her whole life, even though her parents, in effect, rescued us. Enough about that. August fires. The month before I was born, my stone mother moved back to her parents' house. Walls to each side of her sliced thin as flakes of skin, narrow as finch song pushed through windows and doors to an ear. Who knew brown liquors of smog lay all along the coast, and waves pushed up the sand, saying her name once again, each a lover, and this stone mother too far away to hear them, any sound not a choir of dust. I was born to that quiet house, the slate interior, the granite hum, and the rocking, and the song that once she could sing again moved out the screens, across August hillside fires to the sea, where a painted boat would wait, leaning. Because I never lived with him, I never knew much about my father. His mother, who lived on Southwest 12th, for 30 years, we would see now and again, and when we were adults, she would give us a little backstory on his childhood, which was not a nice one. The past complete. My father's father drank until blind. He beat my father bad and often. Who knows what drives a man to blacken the eye, break a boy's arm? We want a diagnosis. My father's mother gave him to the nuns to save his life, then took him back, surrendered him again. She worked around the worst drunks and took her beatings too. And don't dare judge her for not leaving. Our comfort once the danger gone, boy and woman safe, the past complete. But my father's father, even now, could use the terrible love of our imagination to stop the hour, that fist, to hold this through line between us. So, a little bit about where the title of this book came from and the poem that's based on. So, the book that I'm reading from is The Oratory of All Souls. An oratory is a piece of rhetoric, an oratory is a song, but an oratory is also a chapel. And the English painter Stanley Spencer was commissioned about 100 years ago to illustrate, via 19 paintings that he made, a small chapel on the land of some people who had lost a son in World War I. So the chapel is half the size of this room. But he created this huge painting behind the altar, and there were 9 paintings over here and 9 paintings over there. And he called the series of painting the Oratory of All Souls. So the chapel, which is technically the Sanda Memorial Chapel, you can look it up and you can actually see the paintings, is now called, informally the Oratory of All Souls. So the chapel's called that. The series of paintings is called that. The 19 poems I wrote about the 19 paintings are called that, and my book is called that. So it's getting a lot of use as a title. And Stanley Spencer was an orderly in World War I, and he spent the first couple of months of World War I in Bristol, in Western England, where a hospital for the mentally ill served a dual purpose as a place where wounded soldiers were coming in, so you can imagine how that worked out. And later he served in Salonika in a field hospital. And of the 19 paintings that he did, 15 are quite small, 3 by 5 maybe. But they illustrate like just the daily life of the soldier and the daily life of people like him, like an orderly. They don't glorify war in any way. And if anything, they sort of embody Spencer's cosmology, really, which is that the sacred and the eternal is in the simple, acts of mercy that people do. So I'm just going to read the first 3 of the 19, and they're very short poems, and you'll get a sense from the title of the subsection about how narrow the focus is. The first one, a convoy of wounded soldiers arriving at Beaufort Hospital gates. Rhododendrons camouflage the iron until the last curve of macadam, where the gates swing in, take 3 men to open onto stone the lunatics still call home. New arrivals wave their flags at us. No, it's trucks of broken bodies in a story of white slings. Scrubbing the floor. Where one dark meets the next in the long corridors under the earth, a man tracks in soap the wing beats of angels. All across the red tiles, body splayed, the failed flights circle after circle, the trays of bread sailing over him toward every compass point of the hungry. Ablutions. We would iodine the rib wound, pat dry the bathed back. We would polish brass fixtures for art, for a weekend pass, We would take the arms akimbo down from each invisible cross. We would have you lather your own hair like that on a body you might love again. So 16 of those 19 paintings are that kind of focused, changing the bed, scrubbing the floor, making tea for the patients, dressing a wound, that sort of thing. But then there's this magnificent 10th painting that goes up behind the altar, and it's kind of a resurrection scene. So you go from the quotidian to sort of this visionary thing. And you can see those paintings online if you just Google Stanley Spencer, the Oratory of All Souls. It'll take you to the National Trust site where those paintings are, where the chapel is. Couple more from this book. One more along the lines of that community suffering I was talking about. I went to Chile a couple of times, once with a group of students. It was great. You know, we went to a lot of the Neruda sites, you know, and then we went up to Peru and went to Machu Picchu. But one really striking place that we went to in Santiago, Chile, was San Cristobal Hill, which rises several hundred feet above the town, and on top of the hill is a huge statue of the Virgin Mary. And off to the side of the statue is a kind of a devotional area where people leave rosaries and holy cards and light candles because they're petitioning, you know, the Virgin Mary for grace. San Cristobal Hill. For the Immaculate Virgin, they leave a picture of the son she saved from mystery fever, infant of the daughter they thought lost to gangs, daughter steered home by the daily candle, grandmother made comfortable even as her mind evades her, grandfather lifting a suitcase to his side. For the mother of all, they leave barrettes, necklaces, thin leather wristbands, holy cards, one plastic rose, an unfolded fan, red pencil, scapular of the beloved. They leave a white ribbon, pink band that used to hold her hair in place, finger puppet, handkerchief tied in a bow, pacifier, shoelace, sun visor the baby wore that day in the stroller. They leave a child's rosary, and a child's rosary, and a child's rosary. At the base of the statue of the Mother of All Mercies, no one knows which objects arrive here by grief and which by gratitude. A scapular needs to be worn to grant it promise. Where is the body it belongs to? The mother kissing her daughter. Is this before the surgery or the last photo before the surgery failed? No one is telling. Here below the left ankle of the Immaculate Virgin, in a hollow below her base, where any whisper will not escape, even to the rains now, dousing the candles, rains that move east to become infinite snow along the infinite granite rope of the Cordillera. So there's another artist that I pay attention to in this book, the Minnesota artist Brian Frink, who's a great friend of mine. He had a series called Memory of Water, and they were all abstract. So the nice thing about that is that it allowed me to do whatever I wanted to with them. This one is not so abstract. It's called Constellation, and all you have to do to imagine that is to imagine the ocean at night, the stars above, and Brian has conveniently, traced in some of the lines, to indicate the constellations. Constellation. The death of a star trails its light all these billions of years, only to find a human drawing lines pulse to build beast or archer. We would make a story to see through the night. Each stringed thing would wait for extinction to find it, to undress mythology and belief. In no time, not a thing would remain but Leviathan, commanding the great curved deep, and above it, the face of the waters, and across that, the first breath moving again. The last poem in the book is based on a poem of Brian's called Shoreline. It's probably the shortest poem in the book, 5 lines. Shoreline. Who knew memory is concave? Who knew its tide didn't need us or our tiny boat? just to wash through and under it toward that beach, that beach. So a lot of you know about the Stafford Challenge. On January 17th, 2024, about 1,000 people decided to write a poem a day in the manner of William Stafford. And not everyone made it to the end, but I did. I wrote 366 poems. It was a leap year. And I kept writing after this January, taking some days off to try to go through that pile, 95% of which is just trash, but that wasn't the point, just see if there's a book there. So these are some poems that kind of made some of the cut. A small offering then. The day we walked the rainforest garden in Vancouver, waiting for a friend, we were bits of color in our coats, weaving under mist through giant fern and hemlock. What could we ever come to know about this world? Fawn lily, hedge nettle, betrayal. We walked as if on a closed loop, as if our friend was never arriving. It was a strange country. Ravens spoke their own dialect beyond the gray. Later we came to call this joy, the salmonberry blur, trilliums at our feet, moving inside that easy quiet. Then, from some great distance, someone calling out our names. One of the things that you had to do on the Stafford Challenge is just keep finding things to write about, which is great because we know intellectually that poems are around us all the time, but we like to think about it for 2 or 3 days, but you can't do that. So I was taking a lot of inspiration from other writers, not really writing imitations, but just being inside their sensibility for a while and then seeing how that affected my work. This one's called Rescue, and the trigger for it was a line by Thomas Transtromer. Waking up is a parachute jump from the dream. And I have to apologize now because whenever the epigraph is better than the poem, well, it's over. But, When I was a kid, it was no great feat to cross the sky. My dreaming self wanted to see everything, speed across desert, ridge, or ocean, wanted the dip, bank, stall, and soar, but I can't recall one place I was headed. I was no savior. I had no mission. Around that time, a boy I knew planned to run away, but only got to the next lawn. I sat with him while he cried. We sat until dinner time, shadows long across the spaces between homes. Did we make a pact before he turned back? Was I his best friend now? Was it then, under that duress, I bound myself to earth? Another group of inspirers, I have this book of ancient Chinese poems translated by Kenneth Rexrath. I think it was copyright 1971. And all you got to do is read any of those poems, and they're not ashamed about being lonely. They're not ashamed about being hungry. They're not being ashamed about staying up all night and drinking. They're on the road. They miss home, and it's resonant sometimes with your own life. And so this one is inspired, I guess, by Ouyang Su, who wrote between 1007 and 1072. On the evening of the blizzard in a faraway town, I walk home down the alley. All the clerks left their desks before daylight failed. Whatever tracks they left behind their shops are hidden like the houses 2 blocks away, the oaks and elms, the moon, the hearts of men. Now that the wind is really blowing, I follow the braille of brick walls back to my tiny apartment, where I cook myself a small feast of noodles and greens. I crack a fresh egg, toss the contents in a bowl until everything is one texture, silky, rich, ready to confess all the crimes. and this one sort of takes off after Dufour. The house at the beach in a rainstorm. Sitting on the broad bench beside the window, the rain coming sideways, playing the glass like a tin xylophone. Times like this you remember heartbreak you'd put away, no more pain, only its memory, pockmarks on the walls of the spirit where a small thing inside had stood for the execution. Now and then the rain stalls and the wave break reappears, only a brief walk down the sand. The salal that would be at your feet just outside quivers in the gale. If it was a glass of wine that led you to sit here, maybe 2 glasses. If the storm drew you here to sing, the fire gone out in the hearth, does it matter your voice cracked years ago? No one has ventured outside. The rain is falling sideways again, like dull castanets on the window. It is something to brood on when the power fails. The song of the storm joining the song of memory. All this in the growing darkness, even as the ghosts of the house discuss your case, how many surprises you can manage. We're doing okay on time, right? Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, okay. Okay. Another couple things I've been writing about. I've been writing about my shadow, and maybe it was all that time in Minnesota and, reading the poems of Robert Bly that made me think about my shadow all the time. And that's, that part of you that you press down and you don't want to hide yourself from yourself sort of thing. But I've been having some fun with it, taking it seriously sometimes, flippantly some others. So here's a couple of those. My shadow remembers the dormitory, my shadow remembers the dormitory bomb. He feels the detonation the way one feels a wave slam, all in the chest, and then he's waking the body, pushing it past the blown-in door, down the hall through white smoke, blown-in door after blown-in door, bell and alarm pulsing toward where the mind imagines light. My shadow cradles the chest thump to this day. There was something one could say about morning ghosts stumbling to the stairway and the glass at the end of the hall shattered, the sad blinds twisted, lodged in the pepper tree across the lawn. There was something one could say about us all barely dressed, shivering in morning fog, counting heads to see who hadn't made it, down 3 flights. My shadow saves the detail, unaccounted for, a kind of shame in its safe deposit box, waiting for exact words to free it. My shadow throws me into the pit to teach me a lesson, to leave me to my wits, to know the wormy zone it thrives in. Robert Bly was there, Sylvia Plath, Dick Hugo. But I should tell you right away this is a lie I would expect the shadow to try to hide. The truth is, I was alone there. I saw the slightest gleam off tree roots. Though starlight did not reach me, I needed to supply my own music. Try humming, he said. That's my everyday. Try not to let yourself be erased. This is the shadow talking. Try humming, he said. That's my everyday. Try not to let yourself be erased, like what you let happen at high noon in the desert when you stood on tiptoes and joined your hands above you like someone prepared for a high dive or posing for a photo, like someone trying to erase his shadow. Back when you still thought yourself immortal, when all the waves at the ocean broke softly across you. Remember I saved you one day. Remember that undertow. Only I knew how to talk to it, to let you go. Couple more here. What we see from the ship. Something Egyptian about the hills, the tawny scrub, straight lines of cultivation, snaked roads vanishing into the desert beyond, like the glyphs of pyramids there under a red sun. The olive trees in the foreground bend north, all in a row, their spindled gestures alive between tombs and the water we drift on, survivors of Pharaoh. Soon enough we'll reach a place like Alexandria, center of everything, where something like our lives have been foretold on sheets of paper made of grass, arranged into piles, set on a niche in a corner of the great library, where we settled into our story years before now, years before the burn. Okay, I'll do 2 more and before the Q&A. Is that all right? Yeah. Okay, good. So there are these 2 guys. So I go to Market of Choice. That's where I buy my food, down in Corvallis. And it has a little patio where you can drink some coffee and have a, while somebody else shops for you if you want. But there's these 2 guys that show up, and I think now it's Tuesdays. And they're, retired, I would assume. But they each have what I have imagined to be a retired greyhound. So 2 older gentlemen and 2 retired greyhounds. Each man in a chair, each dog on a cushion, a table between the pairs. In the sun on the patio of the upscale grocery, 2 coffees, 2 cookies, chewy biscuit for each dog, their great labors done. Occasionally, pain in the joints, addressed by a change of position in chair or on cushion. Sighs, no complaints, friends for life, each one. They ran for someone else's sport, all 4 of them. No complaints now in this wide, partly cloudy world of warm sun, October, north enough on anyone's map to promise rain someday, snow and wind. But not today. Their great labors done, they have human beings, other dogs passing in their separate hurries, those paying no mind to 4 inconspicuous spirits who hold the scene in place. So I'm going to read one, and then we're going to do a Q&A, and then I have a last one. Okay. Oh, man. Okay, I promised you this one. I wanted to read the funny one. No, maybe I'll do, okay. I'll read this one. How our mother spanked us. Never from a seated position, her left thigh like a sawhorse we bent over, jackknifed, her forearm pressing our lower backs, better to keep us down, her right leg looped over our 2 kicking legs, better to keep us down, while her hand descended hard and often from its angry height. Never like that. Instead, from a standing position, her left hand clenching our upper arm while she leaned down to land the flat of her right. By then we had begun a counterclockwise dance that included her immediately, no longer the lead, as she followed our butts around the circle, trying to hit her mark. Faster and faster, dizziness ensuing, sometimes tears, often enough laughter inside our dervish whirling, breathless. When someone asks me, out of the blue, always out of the blue, who introduced me to Jesus, I will say the grandparents with their genuine piety, or the nuns with their knuckle-crushing pointers. But now I think it may have been my mother who chose the inefficient machinery of punishment, whose right hand landed with a missed but chosen mercy. God knows she had her own sins that never met the lash. Later in our rooms, I doubt any one of us ever thought this, though we knew forgiveness came soon enough, like rain. So, I've changed my last poem now, so, yeah, okay.
Well, thank you so much. Let's give Rick another hand, can we? Thank you. So Rick has told you how we're going to proceed, which is that we finished with the poems. We're going to have some Q&A now, and Kristen is going to bring the microphone around. And please wait for the microphone to get there, because we'd like to get the question on the recording. We've heard that a lot, that we hear the answer, but we didn't hear the question. So. That is not my fault. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Rick is going to end with a poem. So give some thought to what questions you'd like to ask Rick, and I'll start and ask you to talk some more about writing Oratory of All Souls. So I've been fascinated by that. And did you have sections planned early on? And if so, did you write poems for a particular section? Or just, how did that all transpire?
And you're talking about the whole book, not the
Yeah,
19 poems?
yeah,
Okay.
the whole
Yeah,
book.
Yeah. So, you write a poem one at a time. And the way that I usually develop a book is I feel like, the poems for the last 2 or 3 or 4 years have reached a critical mass. And then I go through them all and, put them in a big pile if I think they might make it into the book. And then I read the poems that are in that pile and see if there's some threads that I could identify. And there often are. And then I put those, poems about mother and father, poems about this, that and the other, put them in little piles. But what I do not do is decide, I'm going to have a whole section now about mother and father and a whole section now about that. What I do then is then I get a sense of, you've been obsessed enough about this issue that you wrote 10 poems about it, and you've been obsessed in a different way about this other one, and you wrote 5 poems about it. And then what I generally try to do is orchestrate those 5 poems or those 10 poems across the whole arc of the book. So I knew that the poems about the painting were going to be in a single section, that made sense. But the other ones were, a lot of it's intuitive, but you think, well, what would be a good first poem in a book? What would be a good last poem in a book? What would be a good first poem in a section? What would be a good last poem in a section? And if you have this first poem in a section and last poem in a section, what kind of arc does it suggest just reading the first poem and the last poem? And a lot of that's just intuitive. And it doesn't have anything to do with them all being about the same theme or not, or even the same location. So I had this idea, like I said, that some of these poems are about individual and community suffering. So one of the things I did want to do was to kind of toggle back and forth about, here's a poem about my mom, here's a poem about my dad, but here's a poem about those kids separated from their parents at the border. Here's a poem about, that place down in Santiago. So I wanted to kind of zig and zag a little bit, which doesn't answer the question about the sections, but except that I didn't want them to be homogeneous.
Yeah.
So I wanted them to have a kind of a heterogeneity about them. The best I can do with that question.
Yeah, so thank you.
Okay.
No, you have.
Okay.
Are you talking about how you approached it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But I've never been in a position where I have 40 poems and I think, I have to write 10 more, to make this book. It's always like you've already written the book. Now you need to find it, in those 366 poems, and once you find the parts, then you need to discover if there seems to be an organization that's announcing itself to you. I definitely wanted those poems about the chapel to be at the center of the book. For one thing, I wanted people to have to read a little bit till they figure out where the title came from. But it was kind of the heart of the book in a way.
Question for anyone?
Okay, this might be a kind of complicated question, but I know you're going to get what I'm after. So when you're writing about a family or youthful memories where a really strong religious component is part and parcel, and it hasn't been all that great, or it's a mixed bag, where does the loyalty clause come in? Or sort of the tightrope walk between total acceptance and total rejection.
Talking about of the faith tradition in the family?
Right.
Yeah.
And the cultural component that's mixed in with it, that's not really itself religious necessarily.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a family that was strongly Catholic, and it was, compared to other things that you hear, incredibly functional as a family. My grandparents were, and my mother even though in the 1950s she might as well have been excommunicated as far as the church was concerned, but she still went to church, and she had some understanding priest that still would give her communion, and she volunteered at the church and stuff. So, so even though, we might disagree with that policy, in practice, it was kind of nurturing for her. The thing that I read about my father and his father's father, that was something I heard about after the fact. I cannot imagine that, that's an alcoholic household, that's a violent household, that's, everything. And I did know my grandmother better than I knew my dad, and she was a saint, I mean, in all the ways that we talk about that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I guess what I'm saying is that, as an adult, I questioned a lot of things, about the church that I grew up in, but I grew up, in Vatican II, it had a really strong social justice component. So, and part of the time in Catholic school, I had Maryknoll nuns were my teachers, and they were like gung-ho about social justice, and so there was more of a congruence there than later with some popes that, we didn't agree with so much, and we became Episcopalians. So now, we get the best of both worlds. Yeah. So I guess I didn't have those kind of conflicts that a lot of children have, or at least, or maybe my shadow is hiding all that from me. That could be it. I acknowledge that's a possibility, but and obviously, some of that imagery shows up in some of these poems. But yeah, that's enough said, I guess, about that. Thank you.
Kristen.
I'm curious to know how much your writing is influenced by what you read versus what you keep writing. Does that make sense?
I'm very influenceable in a way. I don't think my style necessarily is, but I can pick up things from anybody that I'm reading, even a book that I don't like. But I love Transtromer because he has these great jumps, and then I love Stafford because he starts with the quotidian so often, and I love Rutke and Hugo and for their music, and Plath for her just incredible sense of metaphor, and so it's more like what I take away with me from the reading is can I write a poem not like that, but can I write a poem that is so as musical as that poem, or as free to jump as that other poem. So I'm kind of influenced that way, I think.
Then can I follow up?
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of something you recently just challenged yourself to do that was either a success or?
Well, I'm still writing some of those poems about ancient Chinese poets, So, one of the things that, if you're an American poet, if you're a certain kind of American poet, there will be some tides in the culture encouraging you to be cool and ironic, which is basically a way of covering up your feelings. And what I like about the Chinese poets is, like, if they say I'm lonely, I'm lonely. I've been on the road for 10 days. And it still feels a little weird for me to write that. One thing I was kind of getting from them was, can you just name a simple emotion, that you're feeling, and kind of work with that, and not. I'm still pretty much an image-based writer, and a lot of, audiences think different things, but a lot of what I think is happening in my work is that a lot of the feeling and is embedded in the imagery, but James Wright at the end of his famous poem says, I have wasted my life. It's not hiding behind a metaphor or anything, Of course, the beginning of that poem is full of images. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
It does, and it makes me think of a line in your poem that you used tonight, laughing in between bites. That was extremely effective, and I saw the truck, and I saw the sun setting, and this is happening, and all the things you're imagining. And I was like, that's so simple, but it was so effective. and really moving, because there was a moment there, and I was able to put myself in it.
Oh, good, thanks.
So, thank you.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Any questions for Rick? Are you going to read the poem that's on the broadside?
I was going to, but now I'm going to read another one because you have that one on the broadside now.
Why don't you read two?
Okay, I'll do that. Okay, yeah. Yeah, because the one that I wanted to read, and I ran out of time, is it's a little bit sad. And so, and I do like City in the Desert. I'm glad, I'm really happy that you made the broadside. Okay, so I'll read two. So I didn't grow up with my dad, like I said. My sisters and I really became friendly with him as adults, and of course he got to know his grandchildren, and that's fine. But he was still quite an emotionally, stunted, person, and we love him for that, So, but when I look at pictures like of me sitting on his lap at my grandparents' house, I think, that's so weird because maybe I didn't see him for another 10 years after that or something like that. So this poem, I have the poem right here. So, but I read that next. So this one is called "Photo with My Father in the Red Leather Breakfast Nook. Hibiscus wallpaper loud in suspension behind us." I love that hibiscus wallpaper, so I had to get it in a title. I'm 5, balancing on his knee. I wear Keds, blue jeans, a red polo shirt. He wears work boots, blue jeans, a white t-shirt. We look into the camera. Minutes before, my grandmother says there's a man I should meet. Next thing, my father's at the door, his 18-wheeler knocking at the curb. Certainly we have cookies, but no mother here, still at work at Douglas Aircraft in El Segundo. No grandfather either, still at the Union Hall downtown. My father asks the names of friends, hobbies. He asks about my sisters, still at school, and the dog, still missing in the yard. If I say I cannot love him, that expected thing, will I go to hell? He only has 5 minutes. I have never lived with this man. He has a shipment of missile parts to deliver to the base in the desert. Some will save lives, he tells my grandmother. He needs to get beyond Tonopah, through the Air Force gate by dusk, or else become a target, a white spot on dark screens watched by dozens of others whose job it is to keep the desert free of danger through the night. He wants to feel safe, he tells my grandmother. He has a borrowed cot for sleeping at the edge of tarmac under frozen stars. He'll be the first to hear the jets scrambling. So, I didn't want to end with that, and happily the broadside is, I did want to end with this one. City in the Desert. Before tall buildings sheathed in black glass, there was the dream of glass. Stucco homes suffered in the heat like always. Cars drove into town on wooden ties laid across sand between there and Los Angeles. In front of homes, a dwarf palm or barrel cactus. At night, snakes longer than a man's arm skated from one thing to the next. On the bedroom wall of the last house on the last street before his hometown gave way to great darkness, a boy drew his plans for a river coursing through paved streets, sidewalks lined with each kind of tree. An orchestra played in the park at the center of town, people fanning themselves in the heat. He drew buildings so high they made a jagged line at the top of the eye, like the mountains north of there, or mountains across the ocean, say the Alps, where people hike all day on green hillsides studded with flowers. They sing to each other without shame. Thank you. It's really great to read here. This is a great series you got going.
So there are books over here. Take a look at them. There are refreshments. Please help yourself.